Right. Well, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are located. We're here in Washington, D.C. My name is Paulo von Schirach, and I am the president of the Global Policy Institute, a research organization in Washington, D.C. For those of you who don't know where we are, we're in downtown Washington, and as a matter of fact, very close to the White House. I am also a professor of political science and international relations at Bay Atlantic University, all located in the same place. And today, as the program indicates, we're going to talk about Ukraine. And we're very fortunate to have with us Dr. Arten Gergun. I hope I did it right. Thank you. Who just explained to me that while fully Ukrainian, he may have some Turkic roots back then. That's always interesting. And who will discuss with us, obviously, an extremely important topic. Of course, Ukraine is all over the place. It's in the headlines every day. Obviously, in Europe, in Ukraine itself, needless to say, in Europe, but also here in the United States. The war in Ukraine, let's not forget, it's not just some kind of an accidental mistake or something. It's a deliberate war of aggression, unprovoked, unjustified, with no possible rationale to say, oh, as I've heard from somebody, oh, Putin had to do this. This is a long story. We're not going to go into this because otherwise we get lost. But anyway, it's there. It's the most unfortunate. We know about the courage and the bravery and the sacrifice of the Ukrainian people, both of the armed forces and the political leadership and the people at large who've been bearing the brunt of this invasion with all the costs associated with that in terms of death, people wounded, destruction, internally displaced people, refugees, and on and on. We know that there is a fierce determination on the part of the Ukrainians to resist and hopefully repel this attack. We also know that, in order to conduct a war, you need money. As the old French say, c'est l'argent qui fait la guerre, right? It's money that makes war. And without money, it's very difficult to put together the armed forces, whatever it takes, the people, the training, the armaments, the hardware, the ammunition, the refueling, everything that goes with it has to be paid for somehow or given to the combatants somehow. Anyway, forgive me for the long introduction, but our special guest today, his specialty is really economics, and he's going to tell us how he thinks that there is a way out of this problem, considering, I should add, that while Ukraine has been supplied enough to survive, let's be frank, not enough to make a huge difference on the battlefield, but certainly enough to survive by both European allies, the European Union, and of course, even here from Washington, from the United States government. The question is there a better way? Is there a way in which the economic effort can be self-sustaining and all that? But I don't want to talk too much. I would like to yield the floor to our distinguished guest, who will tell us how one can finance this conflict, mostly with domestic resources, I guess.
Thank you very much for such a nice introduction and referring to the French phrase you used, à la guerre comme à la guerre. So that means we need to fight the war as it should be the war. And from the financial perspective, this means that you need to transform your financial system, to transform your economy in order to support military effort. And in my analysis, I'm touching Russian system, what are the pluses and minuses of this system, And then I also will refer to UK's experience during World War II, some of US experience during World War II, and to the economic model they've used at the time. And then I'm going to refer to Singaporean experience, which they, for the most part, borrowed from that time, and it's still existent in their financial system. And interestingly, all these kind of stories, they can be relevant for Ukraine today, especially in the light of recent political changes in US. So let me start. I will start with my slide. I need my slide to, we will see. Yeah. It was working before the webcast. Maybe I just don't know how to use it properly. Some technical. Oh, yeah. It's working. Okay, I will just like try to be closer to.
You gotta point to that laptop.
To the laptop.
Maybe you can do it.
But I can move like closer to.
This explication.
Okay. So let me begin with my first slide. It's about some basics of Keynesian military economics, which was the financial and economic model for United Kingdom in times of World War II. So the main.
So if I might speak a little bit louder,
yeah,
maybe.
Yeah, sure.
Sure that everybody gets the good volume.
I will start with the household fallacy. It means that the government, unlike a household, can run budget deficits by so-called printing money. It means that any government which has a sovereign currency, for example, like Ukraine, it can expand more than it earn it in budget revenues. So the governments are not like households where you are financially constrained in times of crisis and you need to save in order to survive the crisis. When the government faces the crisis, so they can just move through it, financing its own expenditures. And this is the essence of countercyclical policy. So in times of economic downturn, the private economy shrinks, but the government can expand its fiscal stance and support economy, and your GDP will stay afloat. Other two things are liquidity preference and deferred consumption. But deferred consumption is very important in times of war. It means it's something like the opposite of the mortgage. So when you take a mortgage, you consume first, so you get your flat, and then you pay, and during some period of time. But in a deferred consumption scheme, you pay for some period of time, and then you get your. In case of mortgage, it's a house or an accommodation. So that's the financial scheme which was heavily used during the World War II, and it's also working in such interesting economies as Singapore. So let me continue. We'll start with Russia. I called the economic model bastard Keynesianism. It's referring to famous book by Lynn Sturgeon, as well as a bust shoe, which is typically a Russian footwear. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, this is the author of Russian economic military policy, Mr. Oreshkin. He is Putin's top aide on economic questions. And as early as 2019, he endorsed a clearly Keynesian view that deficits don't matter, but aggregate demand is. So my sense is that Russia was preparing its economy well before the start of this barbaric invasion into Ukraine. Maybe I should do it. I'll ask him. Okay. Yeah. So how does it work for Russia? On the right, you can see the components of the GDP and all the statistics from Russian Academy of Science. So you can see that there's a budget deficit. It's quite modest, but they are operating with budget deficits in order to print rubles. And the only thing they can do using just rubles without any foreign currency is just to produce weapons. So they don't need actually tons of American dollars or euros in order to produce some simple but quite heavy stuff like artillery shells or Kalashnikov rifles. So they can just print rubles and finance it. Such mode of financing military production gives very nice multipliers for Russian economy. So the military factories get their orders from the government. People who are working on the factories and soldiers at the front line, they have increases in their pay. So the whole economy kind of is lifting up, and that is the way for Russia to carry through the war. And that's why Western economists have underestimated the resilience of Russian economy. So the like dominant view 2 years ago was that they will suffer an economic downturn because they will lack revenues from their exports. But actually, in order to produce weapons, they do not depend much on foreign assets and foreign exchange.
So may I ask, sorry to interrupt, but a quick clarification. The conventional wisdom here, and please, you will explain where we go wrong, is that Russia is doing reasonably well financing the war. I mean, all what you said probably is bears significantly on this, simply because they've been able to circumvent the sanctions. And what was the plan, at least at the very beginning of the invasion of Ukraine, was we're going to shut off Russia from everywhere. They will not be able to do any business. They will export nothing. They're cut off the international financial system, from the SWIFT system, and will be frozen to death in a sense, because they'll not be able to do anything and get revenue. Whereas, as it turns out, fortunately, many countries are not observing the sanctions. Russia continues to export its major sources of wealth, that is oil and gas and other things. And the idea is, well, with that money that they get from India, selling oil and gas, or China, or who knows, Brazil or South Africa, they finance the war. That's the conventional wisdom here. But you say that is not so. Can you elaborate on that and explain to all of us who are not obviously familiar where the real trick? I mean,
Yeah, in the course of actually my next 10 slides are precisely about that topic.
Okay.
So
thank you.
I just can continue presenting and answering your questions.
Keep going. Keep going.
Okay.
Sorry for the interruption.
No worries. It's it's a great question. Yeah, this next slide. So I will speed up. This is the slide that indicates that Russia hit the production capacity limits. It means that in terms of military production, they are at their peak, so they cannot rapidly expand. At least for now. So that's why they need buying weapons from Iran and North Korea. So next slide, please. They also utilized the labor force, so we can see that the unemployment is about 2.5%. It means that almost any available labor resources are fully utilized, and if you continue beyond this point to ramping up military production, you will face the wage price spiral, and clearly in some types of industries in Russia, we can see this is happening. For example, the salary of the truck drivers are much higher than salaries of white collar workers. Next slide, please. This is the GDP by components, and you can see these yellow bars. That means that all this fiscal stimulus is going into consumption. It means that Russian people who gets these newly minted rubles, they try to invest them into something more liquid than Russian ruble itself. Back in the day, it was US dollar, but now they are cut off. I mean, at least the big chunk of the population, they are cut off the access to US dollars. So they invested into real estate market. And on the right, you can see that the price for the square meter of real estate in Russia is skyrocketing. Next slide, please. And you can see that the central bank, Russian central bank, has to react, and they increased the interest rate to one of the most highest rates in the world, and I believe it's 21%, and is going to be higher, yeah, in order to beat the inflation. But the drawback of this policy by the central bank, it means that you are shrinking your aggregate demand, and that means that despite some Keynesianism in Russia, they haven't read obviously the book written by Keynes, which you can see on the right bottom corner, which is called How to Pay for the War, and where Keynes was advocating against using interest rate as a tool to beat the inflation during the wartime. So clearly, Russian economists missed the pot completely. Next slide. So now they face the consequences of not reading the Keynes properly. So they had to kill their preferential mortgage program, and now banks are now financing these preferential mortgages, which were actually the part of incentive for the soldiers to fight at the front line. Next slide. We also see the twofold rise in microloans and personal bankruptcies in 2 years. Next slide. And clearly, we're going to see some more Raskolnikovs in the near future. In Russia, I came across a very interesting article with calculations about the interest rate, which
maybe
caused...
you want to explain to everybody about who Raskolnikov is. I mean, it's very famous. For those who know a little bit Russian literature, you can explain.
Maybe you
Please.
Yeah.
No, I'll leave it.
Yeah, he was a client of a lady who was.
So this is a novel.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is a novel
Fictitious.
by Dostoevsky, the
Yes.
Crime and Punishment, and
Yes.
the main character Raskolnikov, he owed some money to a poor old lady who was a private credit person. And the interest rate for which Raskolnikov eventually killed her because he couldn't pay off his loan, so he decided just to kill her. It was 237% of annual interest rate. And now the interest rate, the maximum rate of interest on such type of loans in Russia is about 292. So it's like almost 60% higher than the original rate, which caused Raskolnikov to do this pretty awful murder. Next slide, please. This is how Russia circumvent the sanctions. So in order to import critical stuff, they use Central Asian countries as a proxies. And next slide, please. And in order to export, they use predominantly African countries as a proxy. And this is by the way, my favorite slide. You can see that this Liberian tanker bears the name Ligovsky Prospect. It's the central street in St. Petersburg. So they are not even hiding it.
Liberia.
Liberia.
Of course.
Yeah.
Strong connections.
Yes.
Liberia and Russia.
Yes.
Historically proven.
Yes. Next slide. And here we come to your question. So what is happening with all these revenues which they get from the export of the energy resources? So basically they don't get US dollars and euros. So you can see that the share of these reserve currencies into total revenue is shrinking. So basically they are getting Russian rubles and other interesting currencies like Indian rupees or drachmas and all kinds of developing countries currencies. And the caveat here is that for the most part, all these currencies are not fully convertible. And it's very hard to finance military effort using Indian rupees or something like that.
Please elaborate on that because that's fascinating. So the Indians say, okay, we'll buy your oil.
Yeah.
And you've got to accept payment in rupees, in Indian rupees, not in dollars, which used to be the established currency for these transactions. So the Indians buy the oil, they pay Moscow in rupees. And what does Moscow do with all these rupees?
Well,
buy tea? I don't know. What do they do? They got plenty of tea in Russia anyway.
Yeah, eventually they ended up investing rupees into Indian stock market because
they have no
other viable options. They could.
But does that work for them? In other words, you sell something because you get revenue that you can utilize for something.
Not really.
So this way they get rupees that they don't know what to do with them. It's like getting paper. So this is really bad business for Russia. For the Indians, I'm sure it's great because they get to pay their own currency at a discounted price and they get all the oil that they want, which is fantastic. And then, by the way, they refine it in India and sell the refined products to Europe. So that's really a very nice business. But how does that work? I mean, financially and economically, is this good business for Russia?
No.
So why do it anyway?
I have no idea because selling oil to India, you're also upsetting your Chinese friend, which actually provide yuans to Russia. And the next slide I will show that this also a problem for for Russia. You can skip the slide. You will go on. Your next slide. This was previous. And next slide. Next. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah, you can see that a lot of rubles are eventually going back to Russia and causing even more inflation. So this spike in one monetary aggregate clearly underscores this fact. Next slide, please. So this is what's happening with yuan. So if you selling oil to India and you get in rupees, I think you are going to upset your friends in China, because India and China, they typically don't know, they have some problems in their relations, obviously, and you are not getting anything out of these deals except supporting Indian stock market and like tying Russian economy to Indian economy, but not to China economy. And this is a very interesting turn in Russian foreign policy, because they try to portray themselves as best friends of Chinese, not best friends with India. But actually in finance, we can see that the relationships between Russia and China is not so rosy at all, because on the right you can see the difference between the price of Chinese yuan in Shanghai and Moscow. And in this September, they had a huge spike in the price for yuan in Moscow after the sanctions were invoked against Moscow exchange. So you can see that the difference between these, so yuan is the same, but the difference is the place where you get the yuan. So difference in price was up to 42%. So the yuan in Moscow is 42% more expensive than in Shanghai. It means that Chinese are providing yuan liquidity on a very tight conditions for Russians. It means they don't trust fully your business partner, and Chinese central bank PBOC actually doesn't have an outright policy of internalization of yuan. It means that yuan is not actually a substitution for US dollar. It has a completely different set of features that you can use only for actual trade transaction.
But for instance, when the Russians sell oil and gas, they've got at least one pipeline, right, for pipe gas to China. So they get paid in yuan. And then they use the yuan to buy for war material. Is that what they do?
Yeah.
What do you do with that cash? You send it back to China to buy material for the war, or
in theory they can do it, but you cannot do, for example, you cannot buy a luxurious yacht on Côte d'Azur or another luxurious villa, but with US dollar you can. Yeah. So that's the problem, for at least for the wealthy elite,
for the
oligarchs of Russia.
It's not very good business for them.
Yes, again, my point, why they are doing it, and I don't have any rational answer for this.
But okay, please carry on.
Yeah.
So then we get to Ukraine.
Yeah, we'll get closer to Ukraine. Next slide, please. Leave the slide. Yeah, this is a very interesting slide. It means that if you put things into perspective, Russia is spending like 7-8% of their GDP on so-called defense. It means they are spending, obviously, for supporting a military effort in Ukraine. But if you look into 1940s, and if you look to what percentage of American GDP was spent during the World War II, you will see that America was able to spend up to 44% of their GDP for defense. You can see this yellow line spiking on the left, and the red arrow indicates the place where Russia actually is. So Russia is not a military economy in sense of World War II. It's not even near that threshold. And they are already overheating their economy. It means that they lack people, they lack capacity, they also lack instruments to curb the inflation, like a deferred consumption.
And your point is they peaked. That's it.
Yes,
they can't do more.
Yes, they can't do
under
more.
this model.
That's my sense. That's why you see all these hybrid threats, all these ICBMs without nuclear warheads, just empty warheads, because they cannot ramp up their military effort. And actually, my sense is they need a peace deal right now, just to help the economy to get through this period. But they don't want to be portrayed as vulnerable.
If I sorry to interject, but that's stunning for all of us who think, oh, these guys, they can, go on and on indefinitely. It's a war economy.
No,
they have full, I don't know how many shifts in their military factories, so they can ramp up all that, everything, and they'll keep ramping up by expanding the defense industrial base, and they can finance it, and that's good to go, and the people are doing just fine. And by the way, for those who are killed in the war, for their families, it's actually great. My son got killed. Oh, this kind of a dark joke, but look at that. I got $100,000 equivalent.
But it's the reality,
This is what I get. My son is dead, but I am gonna live forever with the pension or the payment that the government is giving to me. And if you go and enroll in the military, there's a sign-up bonus. It's like baseball players here. You get this and you get that, and you make money like you wouldn't even dream of making in the private sector. Well, you may get killed, which is a slight problem, and so you don't get to enjoy all this money. But the way it's portrayed is that they have invented something magic, the Russians, that will allow them to go on and on with essentially no dislocation and no societal pushback. That you're not going to have an anti-war movement. Oh, people say, enough, we lost too many people, they're all dead. No, actually, quite frankly, if people get killed or get seriously wounded, it's great because they get so much money from the government that this looks like a very good deal. Is that a caricature? I mean, is this kind of a joke? Because that's the way we learn. This is what we read in our media, that this is what's going on. And therefore, there's no way, short of direct military, counteroffensive and defeat of Russia in the field, for them to stop, because the idea is that time is on their side. That's what we normally read in the West. Tell us where you tell it a completely different story here.
Yeah, it's not really the case. And moreover, you said that they get benefits because war, but actually, if you have this money and you would like to invest them in real estate, it's already a problem. So that carrot was taken back.
Because it was unaffordable.
It's unaffordable. It's overheating real estate market, and it's overheating banking system.
But it could still be consumption money. In other words,
if you well, you get all these nice rubles, but you cannot buy foreign assets. You cannot buy real estate because it's too expensive. It's now.
But I mean, if you are in a little village in Siberia and what you're interested in,
but even in your little village in Siberia, okay, then you will try to buy some imported goods which are also cut off Russia. So you can buy something Chinese, which also is expensive. So the same price difference is not only it's not only relating to the price of the currency, it's also relating to the price of consumption goods.
Got it.
So in China, it's twice cheaper as in
Russia.
In Russia, yeah.
So it's not such a good deal after all.
It's
all this money.
Yeah,
Okay.
and inflation is ramping up. So it's
so the value of that money goes down.
So if you are in a small village in Siberia, your consumption basket is very different from the basket in the center of the Moscow. So your inflation is like 20-30% per year, and that means in 2-3 years your money is gone.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good point. Well, tell us now how all this applies to Ukraine.
Yeah.
See how magic works or could work.
Yeah.
For your country.
Yeah, I will need one more slide for Singapore. So next slide. Yeah, we will go. Yeah, you can skip. Skip. Yeah, this is the slide of Singaporean financial system. Basically, to cut the long story short, I can tell you that Singaporean dollar typically operates in this left upper corner, which is filled with gray color, and it's a full, like they go in a full circle, and this circle of money flow is completely separated from external sector. So non-resident banks and financial institutions have very little access to internal to Singaporean dollar. It means that you can engineer such a scheme when the government can print money, and it can because they have a centralized pension fund, engineer a deferred consumption scheme. It means for a Singaporean citizen, like you getting higher wages because of this fiscal stimulation of your economy, but also the pension fund will get more funds in his balances, and then this pension fund will buy government securities, and the government getting this pension money will build social housing, which is called HDB house. It's because of the name of Housing Development Board, which builds this social housing. And when a Singaporean worker is getting retired, it can exchange its pension balances to a nice new flat in the center of Singapore with 4 and 5 rooms. And it's a very good deal. And the system works in such a fashion that the generation which is retiring, using their money in pension fund to get the accommodation, and they give that accommodation to the next generation. And then their children, they are taking care about their parents because they've drawn up their pension balance. So that the scheme which is working in Singapore, and in that matter, you can build anything you would like in your country. So Ukraine is a big country. It clearly doesn't lack resources to build something. So we have our own bricks, mortar, steel rebar, engineers, architects, people who can construct, workers who can construct. So you can arrange everything into a nice rebuilding projects and post-war reconstruction. So basically, Ukraine can borrow this scheme, and it means that the Western countries can be focused more on helping Ukraine with their military industry, but not focused on actually rebuilding something. because you don't need American dollars to buy Ukrainian concrete and to hire Ukrainian workers and architects. So next slide, please. We can skip the whole Singaporean part. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. This is also a very important slide. There is no bank, private commercial bank in this scheme. So as a Singaporean, you will deal with CPF, which is Central Provident Fund, is a pension fund. You will deal with Housing Development Board, and that's it. So you don't have a private commercial bank in between financing your mortgage. And remember, it's not a mortgage, it's a deferred consumption. So this means that you don't have an interest rate here.
So basically, forgive me, to make sure I understood, you keep putting money away, right, in this fund.
Yes.
And in the end, because the money has already been put in before you got anything, in the end, you got enough money, and the government says, okay, with that, you can get flat, an apartment.
Yes.
House, something, And as you say, there's no interest rate, there's nothing.
It's
money.
It's very modest. It's 2.5, 2.6%. If you would like to finance it, kind like of a mortgage, but issuing it from Housing Development Board. But if you have enough money at your pension,
that's it.
Yeah, that's it.
So that money is gone, but you got the house.
Yeah, it means that your pension system functioning like a huge vacuum cleaner, which cleans all this excessive liquidity. So this is the element Russians are lacking. So they don't have this. They need to hike up really significantly the interest rate, which kills the whole economy. But they don't understand how you can do it in another way without interest rate.
Okay, but let me ask you if I can, so that we can wrap.
And this is Keynesian idea.
Yeah, let's see if we can wrap ourselves around all this. So do you say to finance construction or reconstruction of Ukraine, this scheme that you borrowed from Singapore could be applied to Ukraine? And you say the Russians don't get it, so they're not doing it, and they're hitting a wall. My question is, well, first of all, why aren't we doing it here in the United States? That's a different story, because we have got different problems, but we run enormous budget deficits. But let's not go there, otherwise it gets too complicated. The French government looks like it's going under because of a budgetary issue. So everybody seems to have similar problems. But when it comes to everything else, do you believe that Ukraine still needs external assistance? I mean, to the best of my knowledge, please correct me if I'm wrong, European Union money is used, among other things, to help the government run itself, meaning pay salaries to civil servants, right? This scheme does not cover that.
It can cover, and because if you start these construction projects at a scale big enough to involve a lot of people in it, you will get powerful multipliers. It means that people will get jobs, they will get paid, and really well paid for their work. And it means that all the taxes, all the revenues which you are lacking for your budget, they will get all these revenues, and then the government can finance itself out of these revenues. The Keynes used a very interesting metaphor of water in the sea. When the tide rises up, it lifts up all the boats. So if you allow this channel of liquidity into your system, it will lift all the boats up, and
with no downside.
the downside is inflation, but if you have this type of sterilizing the unwanted liquidity in your system, like Singaporean have, so you can do it without major significant downsides. And then all the salaries from the government, they will came from the taxes you typically take in a normal economy.
Let me take this in a slightly different direction, and I don't know, not to make things confusing. Ukraine needs a steady supply of both weapons and ammunition. There is a domestic defense industrial base, which is significant. So does all this apply, since you were talking construction, well, construction can be also of defense industries, right? Mm-hmm. So that applies. Do you think that Ukraine can get to a point in which, using this system for financing, that it can become self-sufficient in terms of weapons and ammunition? It does not depend on the largesse of the United States or Britain or Estonia or Poland or whoever, or Sweden, or you think that's possible and can sustain?
I think
this conflict?
No, this is why we need foreign assistance, but I can argue that we can use this foreign assistance not to paying the government officials, not to paying all our budgetary expenses, but to focusing it into investment, into buying know-hows, buying technologies, buying all the capital goods, machines we need to produce it. And we also need to ramp up our chemical industry to produce all these substances, which are very important in military production. And we can do it in Ukraine because if you mentioned European Union, the problem with the European Union is that we sell more grain, more sugar, chicken meat, eggs, and other stuff we can export, and we need to export it more and more to get US dollars and euros to buy 155 rounds for our artillery. And the price for the round is going up and up and up. And this has a very negative impact on European farmers, and you can see all these problems
with Poland,
Poland, with all of our neighbors. So why not to help Ukraine create its modern military industry in order and then produce all these 155s internally at a cheaper price, and then we could stop this dumping the European agricultural market. That could be a very.
On this note, I know at least of one country that is doing, I don't know if it's exactly what you're saying, but something like that, which is Denmark. The Danes, which don't have a very large defense industrial base at home, they said, okay, we're going to help Ukraine by investing. Our form of military aid is really not military, it's financial, but we will invest our own money, Denmark's money, into defense industries.
That's a very good example.
In Ukraine. Do you think that this is scalable, that other countries, Denmark, I think it's a great ally and a great friend of Ukraine. I don't think there's any doubt. I believe per capita are the biggest donors to Ukraine. Correct.
But they're very small, but
exactly
big in relative.
Yes, absolutely. But they're really punching, above their weight, as we say here, or at least they're doing the best they can, much more than even we in America. So do you think that approach could work, could be scaled up for other countries? And so, as you say, not buying ammunition at highly inflated prices, and then you got to dump in Europe cheap agricultural products that upset European farmers and create all sorts of frictions, which are really unnecessary. But so all in all, so that we try to understand all this, which is very complicated. You believe that it is possible for Ukraine, if they followed your advice in terms of this domestic financing system that you kind of experienced and studied in Singapore, where you live and work, by the way, for our audience to be clear on this. So this is not just a by the way thing. I mean, you're there, you studied it, you worked on it, you analyzed it, and so you drew certain conclusions and possible analogies. But so our question is eventually of sustainability, right? Is there a chance that Ukraine can support itself better, and that Western help can be directed in a more productive way, that leading to the same objective, which is to allow Ukraine to defend itself, because ultimately this is what we want to do. And this goes against the conventional wisdom that we maxed out, it's too much, this war is inconclusive, the Ukrainians are not winning, Putin has the edge because of the mistaken idea that he can finance and ramp up the war economy in Russia for as long as he can, without suffering any, how can I say, any pushback of any kind, financial, economic, social. He can just go on and on and on, no problem, because he's figured out a magic that allows him to do so. Whereas the poor Ukrainians are crushed, they're being bombed every day, they're losing territory a little bit, they just can't make it, short breath, and most significantly, the West is tired. And when you hear this chorus of people say, "Oh, let's talk peace," unfortunately, this means let's talk surrender. That's what it really means. It's a code word to say, okay, we're not winning this thing. Please tell Mr. Zelensky that it's time to reconcile with the notion that he's not winning and that more help is not coming. So he better settle, and which means lose territory and allow an aggressor state to say, after all.
And it's even not the final stage, So Putin did this second time. So why won't he?
Yes, again, sure.
Yeah.
But since we have limited time here, and for our audience to try, because you threw in an incredible amount of information, which quite frankly is news to me, and I'm sure news to our friends who are watching us and interacting. So you think that there is a way out of this impasse whereby the West collectively, Europe primarily, and the US can continue to support Ukraine without bleeding to death, while the Ukrainians help themselves, at least in financing some aspects
and
of the war economy.
We can be an asset, to the collective defense. We can be an asset to European economy in such a manner. This is our input into this from a financial side.
Yeah, some people ignore, I think, that Ukraine, out of necessity, has developed sort of cutting edge technologies.
Yes.
In
drones,
in the new sort of generation of war fighting tools, drones, software, cyber tools, which I know nothing about, but it looks like Ukraine is pretty good at it. In fact, leading the world in some sectors. And therefore, this becomes, as you say, we used to say that the US was the arsenal of democracy. Well, maybe Ukraine becomes the arsenal of democracy in terms of developing a state-of-the-art, cutting-edge, defense industrial base, which is a completely different way of looking at it. Until yesterday, we were looking at Ukraine as this beggar saying, please give me more. Oh, no, give me more. And that was that. And more was never enough. And people say, we gave you this, we gave you that. You're not winning. Now we stop, because this is not, this is inconclusive. What you're saying is something completely different.
Yes.
That Ukraine can support its own war effort, and that the Western aid can be redirected in a more intelligent way.
I mean, the potential of Ukraine, just imagine, one of the biggest countries by territory in Europe, I believe it's second or even the first by the territory. And I think it's in the first top 10 by population. In terms of mineral resources, we are number 1 in Europe. So we cannot be beggars, you know. We are a rich country, actually. That's why Putin is fighting for it. So Ukraine can be like better organized, slightly better managed, and be a huge asset to the Western world. And we can be not the beggars. We can be partners. And I think if you move in that type of vision, then we're gonna go big, you know. Ukraine can.
Well, this is an uplifting vision, because obviously everybody's, frankly, usually the mood is rather depressed.
And I can understand why, but in times of war, you cannot be too much depressed, because you eventually you will lose. You need to still focus on the potential of some positive outcomes of this mess.
You know, this is something that I'm sure this is somewhat, I don't know where this is going. Obviously, as you know, we've just had an election here in the United States, and the mood from the future president-elect Donald Trump, and the Congress is skeptical. You know, people say, you know, we tried this, we tried that, it's not working, it's time to stop, you know. And as we say here, stop, you know, throwing, you know, good money after bad. This is not working, and if we keep doing this, it's not going to get any better. What you're saying is something completely different. It will get better, and you will see results if you do what you suggest. You know, convincing U.S. lawmakers and the new executive of brand new ideas, it's a challenge, but maybe worth trying. I don't know. I'm just throwing this as a possibility. And the same applies to Europe. I mean, there's a new executive, as you know, in Brussels. But of course, you know, Europe is more complicated because each country is different, and all European countries, if you look at it from Germany to France to other UK, seem to have leadership issues and political turmoils that are not necessarily related to this. So who knows? But I think it's an argument worth advancing.
Sure.
Do we have any?
Yes.
Yes, please.
I have a few questions. So,
Questions from the audience coming up.
so the Russian situation is relative to Ukraine's situation. Can Ukraine use timeouts to also ramp up? What if Ukraine continues resistance? Is there genuine possibility of Russia's economic crash? And finally, is the West genuinely committed to driving Russia into the ground?
Well, I guess you already addressed that, but you want to add?
I think that if Ukraine will continue without changing significantly internal financial and economic system, then well, in the end, it's a political decision, but I don't see a bright future for Ukraine if Ukraine will carry on without changing anything significant about the things I was talking about.
Okay.
So if you're not going to pushing Ukraine into a properly military economy, then it's carrying on the war in this manner would be very painful for Ukraine. But if we can do all these internal reforms and as I am advocating for, implementing Singaporean scheme into our financial system, then we have a chance for a much brighter future.
Okay. Other questions?
Yes, the second question. So can the West collectively introduce an embargo on trade with Russia and with other countries dealing with Russia? This would quickly end the funding source for them. Or the US and EU simply want to continue trading with Russia, while Ukraine has to fight alone or disappear?
It's also a very complicated question because Russia is a huge country and its share in the energy balance of the world is quite significant, and it's very hard to tell any country, so you don't trade with you, you don't do any kind of deals with Russia. But the West, from my point of view, did quite a good job actually in limiting Russian access to American dollar financial system, and this already has degraded Russia military effort. So the purpose of sanction is not to stop Russia completely, but they actually help to degrade their military effort, and that's why Ukraine still have electricity, internet, sources of communication, and I think the West can keep up on this path, limiting Russians' option and their access to international financial system in a manner that they would not get actual foreign assets, and then we will see that this has an impact on the economy. It's not as something like something with an instant effect, and big effect, but all these effects, day by day, year by year, they are mounting, and we can see the cracks in the financial system, which are clearly visible because of these sanctions.
That's it. Okay, well, thank you. Thanks. I suppose we reached the end of our allocated time, and I would like to thank our audience for following us, whether you're here in the US or in Europe or elsewhere. We appreciate you taking the time to join us and to watch and listen to this extremely thought-provoking presentation, which clearly creates a completely different angle from which to look at the economics of war, that we are not really, it's not really part of the general conversation that we see in the media and commentaries and opinions from economists, from military leaders, and what have you. And again, I at the cost of being really, really boring and redundant, the war in Ukraine is just not like a bump in the road. It's a crisis for the international political system. It is the very first large-scale, unwarranted, unjustified, brazen military attack by a country against a sovereign country, with all the motivations that Russia has given. The first and most interesting one is that Ukraine doesn't really exist, right? It shouldn't exist. It's not a real country. And therefore, since this historically used to be part of Russia, etc., well, we take it back, and that's the end of that story. Thank you very much. We're done. Of course, this is completely unacceptable. It runs in the face of the Charter of the United Nations and every other, agreement international. You don't solve issues with countries via a war of aggression, whatever the issues may be, and that's illegal. If we allow this to end badly, which we may, we'll be sorry. We'll be sorry for this. This is not just something that we can turn the page, move on, and say, okay, well, these things happen, accident on the road. Remember, the United States went to war in Korea to defend that principle. In Vietnam, as bad as it was, the idea was we are protecting the sovereignty of South Vietnam against the encroachments of a militaristic and aggressive North Vietnam and its allies. The war was bad. Let's not revisit that tragedy. And it was conducted poorly, and it was had no support in the United States. But the principle was we don't allow expansion via military means. Last but not least, Desert Storm, 1991, Iraq invaded Kuwait, and President George W. Bush said, this shall not stand. And America, which could have easily gotten along with Saddam Hussein, said, okay, Kuwait, you took it, who cares? As long as the oil keeps flowing, we have no issue. Well, we sent 500,000 men in Saudi Arabia and conducted a very, very large scale with the support of a broad international coalition to uphold this very same principle. A war of aggression shall not stand. Aggressors should not be rewarded by the either indifference or lack of resourcefulness of all the others. I know I'm not saying anything new, but I think it's worth repeating as we are unfortunately about to enter a new year, and soon enough it will be another anniversary in a few months of the beginning of this war of aggression. And I don't think we should forget that this is a war of aggression. This is not, as somebody unfortunately put it, a territorial dispute, something that like two neighbors can go to court to decide, oh, this is mine, no, this is mine, or this pathway to the lake is mine. This is not what we're talking about. These are fundamental principles of international law. And I hope that we don't forget this. And if we do, it will be at our own peril. And with that, I would like to thank our distinguished guest who provided, a new way of looking at this. And we wish you luck and success in convincing whoever needs to be convinced in your own home country and wherever else, here in the US or elsewhere, that this is a way to make this effort more sustainable and productive without the sense of we're burning money and nothing happens. So, ladies and gentlemen, I thank our guest. We thank.
Oh, sorry, one question just came in.
Oh, another final question.
Yes.
All right, let's do it.
So the person is asking, could you imagine any economic incentive to push Putin to negotiating table and make concessions to Ukraine regarding NATO aspirations and de-occupation?
I think strong Ukraine, it would be the best deterrent for Putin, because he's not interested in like territory or just resources. He's interested in power, and he understands only the language of power. So if Ukraine will be powerful, Russia will be deterred and will be safe and secure to deal with Russia, the rest of the world.
Yeah, again, if I may just allow me the privilege of the chair to have the last word. I think Putin's calculus is, I have more staying power than the West. And as the longer this goes, the West will be demoralized, the Ukrainians will be demoralized, and therefore I win. I will obtain favorable conditions at the end for any peace or armistice or truce or ceasefire, whatever you want to call it, simply because I can carry on indefinitely, they cannot. If our friend and colleague here, argues we can turn this around, well, then the calculus changes.
Yes.
Then it's no longer Ukraine that has to sue for peace because help, we're dead, or we're dying. So I know this is extremely complicated and very controversial, but let's hope that these new ideas will find an audience and hopefully some success. So with that, again, let me thank everybody here on behalf of the Global Policy Institute and Bay Atlantic University and everybody here helping us to put together these webinars. And thanks to our distinguished guest.
Thank you for the invitation.
And we wish you best of luck. And
Thank you very much.
we wish Ukraine best of luck. Thank you. We are now adjourned.